Hello, welcome to Postcolonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and in this video I will briefly introduce you to another postcolonial theory concept called Comprador. The word Comprador comes from Portuguese and it literally means a purchaser or a contractor. In postcolonial theory, the term comprador is applied either to individuals or to a class of individuals who, in financial terms, while living in a postcolonial nation, are absolutely reliant on global capitalistic monopolies for their own sustenance and for their own style of life. These people tend to be from the higher echelons of the class structure of postcolonial societies, and their sympathies, alignments are usually already aligned with the global power structures and global financial centers. In Marxism, the comprador class was the petty bourgeois class that was dependent on the largesse of the dominant classes. And you will encounter the word quite frequently in the works of postcolonial theorists from all over the world, but especially from Africa. And specifically in postcolonial theory, a comprador class usually, let's say if you read Chen Wei Zhu, the native elite that is left after the colonizers leave, the wealthy elite, the political elite, whose ideas and ways of looking at their own native cultures are still mediated through European systems. These are the people that would be considered a comprador class, because instead of aligning their interest with their own people, native population of their post colonies, they still indirectly or directly work for the interests of either their former colonizers or their contemporary superiors in international monetary circles. So a comprador class then is a class that is still in league with former colonizers or, the current masters of the universe. Now, in literary studies, similarly, or in cultural studies, the concept comprador can be applied to all those writers, critics, theorists, scholars who are still deeply invested in purely European modes of looking at things, or representing their own cultures in a way that it suits the parameters of the metropolitan academy, metropolitan cultures, and have no nuanced or sympathetic view of their own cultures. So sometimes when people want to blame someone for not being true to their nation or whatever, they are considered kind of comprador intellectuals. So overall, in postcolonial theory, the term comprador involves any group of natives from a former colony, or even now from the post colonies, whose ways of looking at the world are still mediated through European discourses, whose financial interests are and may be deeply connected to the global north or the multinational corporations, and often at the cost of their own people. You could say that it's maybe another term that can replace the elite, the national elite, but the difference is that here a relationship with the former colonizers or a contractual role within the monopoly capitalism of the world is kind of crucial. And for intellectual work, literary work, and scholars, a clear alignment of sentiment and sympathies with the European mode of thinking, or the European mode of permissibility, or whatever is considered good literature or bad literature, that class which does that, which serves the metropolitan cultures without some love and affinity for their own people, would then constitute a comprador class. Now, there are more nuanced theorizations of it. If you read Chen Wei Zhu, Decolonizing the African Mind, he may not use this vocabulary consistently, but he already tells us that the African nations have inherited two kinds of political subjectivities, the Calibans and the Ariels. So the Ariels for Chinwezu or the Comprador class, because they are only native in color, right? But not necessarily in their culture, in their worldview, and they are the remnants of the colonial system who now are part of a national elite. But when it comes time to show their allegiances, they still serve the interest of their former colonizers in terms of finances, in terms of politics, but also in terms of what they privilege as good or bad within their own culture. So overall, a pretty useful term, mostly used derogatively in post-colonial theory as well as in Marxism, and connected to the sentiments, the material interests, the financial interests, and the symbolic interests of a particular class whose sympathies in all fields of culture and politics still lie in a subservient manner to the metropolitan cultures or to the former colonial structures of power, structures of representation, structures of the aesthetic. That is all. I you want me to expand on this concept, I'll be very happy to do that. You can also compare it with other concepts that we use. We also use the concept of the native elite. We use the concept of native intelligentsia. We also, if you come from Marxism, use the concept of the bourgeois and the bourgeoisie. The only difference, maybe the subtle difference, is that the status of a comprador class already presupposes a certain degree of subservience to the master narratives and a certain affinity for the global power structures at the cost of their own people. And that then makes them part of this larger global elite who are mobile, for whom the borders may not matter, and who by and large kind of share similar kind of interests. And so that's how I read the concept. And we could also historically look at the comprador class as within the contact phase of colonialism itself, because this was the class who is either used by colonizers to control the natives or becomes a mediating class where they safeguard their own interest, become part of the system, right, and eventually gain some kind of financial or symbolic or material advantages with their relationship with the colonizers. And if you look at different countries, different post-colonial nations, you can already see that most of the political elite, in one way or the other, formed part of this comprador class. And maybe they still have that kind of power within their own nations. So I hope this explains it. Thank you so much. And as always, I will see you next time. And until then, peace and love.